Good morning, welcome for those of you who are returning, and hello to all of those who are new. I'm Max Columbus, and over the past couple of years, I've been learning and developing skills to become a journalist, and during the past 4 years, I've had the opportunity to work with Laker Update, the West Bloomfield High School's school news show, to further develop my skills from what I've done through my podcast conversations with Max. I'm excited to have been nominated to attend the Washington Journalism and Media Conference held at George Mason University by Miss Jennifer Williamson, and follow along with me as I show you what I've learned and the new skills I'll be developing. I'm part of the Teal group, and I'm about to board my flight to head to Washington. So follow along. Can't wait to see and meet everyone there. Welcome back. I'm Max Columbus, and it is day one of session one of the Washington Journalism and Media Conference. I'm in the Teal group led by faculty advisor Fletch and junior faculty advisor David Kane. And it was really nice to get off the plane today and get to meet some of my fellow classmates here at the conference, and then get to meet some of the interns and other people from other groups and my roommates. We got set up. We were given these badges to carry and then also these booklets. And within the time we spent getting to know our color groups a little bit, checking in, but getting to know people, and we talked about personal and professional image, networking, like a little bit about an elevator pitch, and then I also was able to introduce Savannah Berman from CQ Roll Call to speak to us during dinner. I got to talk to her with some other people here from the conference and learn from her. She talked a little bit about AI, her experience covering the Senate, her philosophy in student journalism, how to get involved, why AI is an important piece that we can't ignore, but we can't let it take over, how AI is forcing people out of jobs, and especially in journalism, and how us as students can progress through that. So that's day one. Looking forward to another amazing day. Coming up tomorrow. We'll see you then. Welcome back. I'm Max Columbus, and this is day two of the Washington Journalism and Media Conference held at George Mason University. We got to wake up and eat breakfast, chat amongst ourselves before splitting off into color groups to discuss the First Amendment. And within our discussions, we were talking about student journalism and how students in high school are not protected by the First Amendment. You are in college, but there's this thing called the New Voices Law, which in many states it's there, and in many there isn't. So, as someone who's written a few political pieces, knowing I'm not protected by the law, because I've written some of them in my school publication, is a little nerve wracking. I'm not nervous too much in the aspect of what will happen to me, but it's the things you think about. What if someone else did it? Something different, but actually it became a problem. We're lucky that it's not censored at our school in West Bloomfield, but it's a concern. So I actually can hope that I'll be able to talk to legislators about making the New Voices Law there in Michigan. And during this time, we also did a simulation where a first year English teacher reported a long-time advanced placement English teacher to the principal for changing AP English scores. And It was pretty easy to do according to this teacher, and she was near retirement and kept getting more bonuses for passing grades. So there was a decision that had to be made of, does she get told she has to retire by the end of the year, or can she continue teaching for those 3 years? So we split off into roles of community members, reporters, being an attorney, student sources, the newspaper editor, the assistant editor, to strategize for about 20 minutes in separate groups about what we would do. My role specifically as a community member was a small business owner across the street, and I was having a lot of theft. And within my store, students would come during lunch or after school, but I'm not a component of believing that students should have a voice in this, and that the adults should be making the decisions. So I decided to go on the argument about transparency is important and it brings people in. When you're not honest as an administration, when this happens, that's how you lose people, and people are already being pushed out. But it was also interesting after the simulation concluded that we discussed that it was hard for us as characters because we all believed that that article the students wrote should have been published and not censored only because it was active litigation. We thought that it should have been published, but because you're in a role, that it was hard to stick in that. So I thought that was pretty interesting, and from what I've heard, it has been different from other color groups. But one thing the First Amendment does not allow, or a few things, are fighting words, obscenity, inappropriate behavior, crimes involving speech, threats, violation of copyright. So interesting to hear that you're not protected after those things occur. And then we got to hear from speakers like Colonel Ali Weisskopf, who's a director of Pentagon press operations at the Department of Defense, or right now known as War, where she talks about how she got to where she is. She applied for the military to get finances so that she could attend college, ended up loving the military, where she decided to stay for 22 plus years, and she's still there. How she balances her role, but also talking about transparency and how being a source is important, and just having the relationships. You know, you may not be able to give everything or verify everything, but it's an important thing. And then we got to speak to freelance photojournalist Anna Layden, who was talking about the definition and perception of a photo. That sometimes we see a photo, it's really simple to us. I personally believe there's no bad photo, you just learn as you do the photo. You may take a worse photo in the beginning and get better by the end, but she talks about how she views photojournalism, and with AI coming on, where she stands with that. You won't know where you'll be in the coming years, but that your goals are achievable and that your photos are very important. And sometimes words aren't enough, and she's been on many of protests covering them as a photojournalist. And one thing that really stuck out, and I'll write about all of this at the end, is the intersection with art and politics is Anna's definition of photojournalism. Quite an interesting thing. Well, then we got to go on a monument tour in Washington. We didn't get to see the Vietnam Memorial or the Korean War Memorial or World War II. It's really nice to go, and we got a picture in front of the Capitol. Well, that was day 2. Stay tuned for more. Day 3's coming up tomorrow. We'll see you then. Welcome to day 3 of the Washington Journalism and Media Conference held at George Mason University. I'm Max Columbus, a National Youth Correspondent from the Teal group. Today we started with breakfast before heading over to the Atlantic to hear from staff editor Janisha Watts, who talked about her transition from being a copyright editor to a staff writer and her experience writing, about creating an outline and how she writes her stories, while also talking about sensitive information with not burning a source. And then we also got to meet with Nancy Youssef, Ashley Parker, and Lucy Olenarip, who are staff writers as well, about their experiences. And they're talking about not burning sources and how sensitive information is important to keep, and that lighthearted talk makes a difference, but also that when you're a writer, that when you're analyzing, not to put your thoughts and opinion into it as it discredits your credibility. All of them were talking about with the rise in digital media a little bit about how things are changing. Their goal isn't to report every single fact, but give long-term analysis on it. After that, we came back for a color group meeting and set up a simulation that we'll be doing tomorrow. We heard from Andreas White Murdaugh, who is a host of This Morning on WTVR CBS, and she really fired us up. Everyone was clapping. We were all being really excited for her. She talked about her theory about just saying yes or getting up and raising your hand. Sure, you can be nervous. It's okay. We're all there, but you're not going to know unless you try. It's basically about putting in the effort, trying something new, and not being afraid to be different. She said something about if you don't get a role, you don't fit in that boat, which is something that I resonated with. I've left a lot of clubs. I didn't always have the seniority in there, but when you're different or on a different path from someone and you stop fitting in or stuff stops working, it's not your boat and you should leave for your own health. And she was talking about how she went from a booking producer on the show and her experience being an events coordinator and covering the Washington Commanders training camp before doing this, and how she's helped many other businesses. And then during career exploration, we got to break out into many different speakers. I met with Roger Smith, who's an undergraduate advising coordinator for the George Mason University. He's a faculty advisor, senior instructor, and he was talking about podcasting and how journalism fits into this. The ethics of journalism don't change. However, it's the platform that changes. All the skills you learn to be a journalist can be transferred into a podcast. It's also interesting to note that podcasts are rising in the charts and radio shows are decreasing, so it's that mix of where do you see the future, some more cost and ethics too, of keeping it simple. If you're going to start something, you don't need a lot of equipment, fancy equipment to get started, just basic skills and a will to try. And he does see podcasts replacing radio, and it has been for a while. Saying that the podcasting allows people to give more of an analysis. We had dinner at some point in between this and the other speaker, but after that we had a little hour of social time where I got to talk to Kayla Sharp just kind of about her experience in journalism and how she got to where she was as a team leader and newsletter, where she gets up in the mornings, reads a newsletter, learns the facts through the day, and puts it all together. But I also got to talk to Ethan Crawford, who's an executive producer for NBC 12 on Your Side, who's a Washington Journalism and Media Conference alumna from 2015. He was a part of the Greg group and joined as a JFA for the Pink group, and he was a student at George Mason University. He did some pretty incredible work, getting some Emmys, starting off at CNN. His whole thing was about connection. He may not know someone, but someone else knows someone. So just by him knowing that someone, you can technically get a job just by reaching out. So I exchanged contact info with him, and I also got to speak to Richard Todd Stafford, who's the Director of Communications at George Mason University Honors College, where I was talking about what the Honors College at George Mason looks like. And through that discussion, he was talking about the rigor a little bit. It's an R1 institution, but he was talking about how basically you don't need to have the best grades, and there's support along the way to help if you're struggling, but it's really recommended that you apply for honors so you're able to get those merit-based scholarships. And then we did an activity within our color group, just to have a little fun and get to know you, of doing 20 different things that had to be photographed. And before we knew it, we were in dorms. Crazy day, busy, a lot of fun. Looking forward to day 4 tomorrow, so stay tuned. Can't wait to see you then. Welcome back to day 4 of the Washington Journalism and Media Conference held at George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia. I'm Max Columbus, and today I woke up, got dressed in professional gear before heading down to breakfast, and then after eating some breakfast, we split off into color groups to work on the pitch simulation, which we vaguely talked about yesterday, of what makes a good pitch, what is needed in a good pitch, to come up with something on mental health. I worked with Sarah, and we were both state reporters, and our prompt, or the story of us as reporters, had to do with Virginia's governor repeatedly highlighting the importance of expanding mental health resources and campaigned on that, but when it actually became time to enact some of his policies, he or she focused more on law enforcement and public safety initiatives, and it made people angry knowing they accepted this person to be their governor, and that what was promised didn't occur. Now, let me just let you know, this is not a true narrative. This is just the prompt, but because we're in Virginia for the conference, that's why it's Virginia. So, for our headline, Virginia's unbalanced approach in handling mental health. Now, it took us about 25 to 30 minutes to come up with that, but before we did that, we were talking about personal experiences. people in her community, people in my community, what our schools do. Our schools are relatively the same in size. Sarah has probably about 500 more students, but the idea of mental health being such an important topic to both of us, and some of her experiences. We were also talking about religious experiences too, and how some of those shaped this theme. While we were doing this, if we could actually write the article, we would talk about statistics because we think that would connect people, but we also want to talk about people's experiences, those who may have been in distress, or those who unfortunately were no longer here. However, mental health is a big problem, especially with young adults and teens. So if you are having a mental health crisis, know there are resources available. There's the 988 number or many other resources. I'll link some of them, but we wrote, Virginia governor claims mental health is a pressing issue in the state, but won't allocate funds in the final budget to address this topic. That very little info, we were able to pitch that to 5 news organizations that were made up for this exercise. The people that weren't reporters or creating these stories were the news organizations. Now, while we were talking to the news organizations, we felt 3 of the 5 could really work for us. One of them was a podcast that had to do with humor, and we didn't exactly feel like humor is an okay way to address this, at least in our opinions. So we were kind of already unsure about that one and not thinking about it. There was another one that wanted to talk about accuracy and justice. There was one that wanted local news with an adult audience. There was one that wanted a family focus. Unfortunately, that source we couldn't publish to in the podcast because breaking news came and we didn't offer the humor part. However, there was one that wanted to talk about school, local policy, crime, and professionalism. So the ones we thought we were going to publish to, we did. And after the simulation, which really was a great simulation, we both learned a lot and had some really interesting discussions. We boarded some of the buses to head to the National Press Club after we went to lunch, and while we were there, we heard from Carmela Boykin, who's a social media editor for the Washington Post, and while we were there, she talked about how some of her hobbies and how she got to where she was, joining a traditional market, doing traditional things. But in COVID, as trends started to move towards the digital age, she wanted to add in her own style with a little humor and breaking it down so there's the other way to get news. She talked about how different things will do better on different platforms. But originally, when she joined as a TikTok reporter, she was solely TikTok, and she said, let's reach more audiences. She talked about her hobbies, her advice about cold DMs. Sometimes just reaching out to someone and saying, hey, this is what I do, or I applied for this, what are your thoughts? Because knowing the people you work with can make a difference when someone's trying to get in, if they have advice. I also talked to Miss Boykin on her experience being a competitive dancer when she was younger, and how she was able to take some of those skills she learned from that and theater to her world of journalism. it definitely helped, and how her friends encouraged her. She's just talked about finding a good friend group, that theater was very good for public speaking, and that the dance thing also helped with the confidence. And also being a fellow Michigander, good things. Apparently, West Bloomfield always beat her in forensics. That's another thing. Then we got to hear from Devlin Barrett, who's part of the New York Times, and he talked a lot about the FBI and how he started as a copy boy and the people he's met and the experiences he's had covering the administration, where he may have started with one or two stories where he was writing those, but now he's on to 8 a week just because of what's happening. He was very personable in that he was sharing stories with people he's met along the way, and it was quite interesting to hear. So after the National Press Club, we were given the go-ahead to change into more casual clothing. I'm wearing khakis and a polo instead of the suit that I wore. After dinner, got to hear from Patrick Money, who's the director of admissions for freshman recruitment at George Mason, which was very interesting, where he was talking a lot about the college search and why applying early is better than late. You're able to get more scholarships through the university, or how you're not necessarily committed to picking versus if you apply later. He also gave the advice of doing your homework, and that it's okay not to know, but you just gotta try and communicate. So go on these tours. When you go, a rep is gonna sell you on it, or they may tell you why that they have a program that's not actually the program you're looking for, but instead try to get you in the door. So ask them the why. Ask them why it's the best. Not, do you have this and what is it? Ask them why they have it, what it stands for. Because some universities, you may want to have this big school that's an amazing school, but you could go to somewhere so much smaller and get a better education because professors were in the field. So it was quite interesting to hear his perspectives on that and how this all worked. And then we went back to our color groups to talk about tomorrow, as we're going to DC. I'm not going to spare the details, but it was more of a logistics and planning, being with a buddy from the conference, and kind of just how that all works. And then we played Color Feud. It's a lot like Family Feud, except it had to do with us playing against all the color groups. We'd answer questions about what a journalist would bring, what's needed to be a successful National Youth Correspondent. Questions like that we've been learning. So it was quite an interesting game. Unfortunately, Teal team didn't win, but Team Teal 6 versus everyone, always. But congrats to the purple team for winning and all the other teams. And there was a lot of screaming involved and encouraging our team, so that's why my voice is a little sore. But it was a fun day, fun time. Can't believe it's coming to an end. It feels like it went by like this. I've met some amazing people, but there's still 2 more days to enjoy it. And there's always memories we'll take along, even when I'm not physically here. So thank you, and we'll see you for day 5 tomorrow. But for now, I'm Max Columbus. We'll see you soon. Correspondent from West Bloomfield, Michigan. Can you please
Michigan? Oh my God.
Can you please further expand on how you took the skills you learned from being a competitive dancer to journalism, and how did your friends influence you to take those skills to the digital market?
Okay. Competitive dance really helped me when I first started and we were doing like TikTok dances. And I was like, wow, it's possible to not have rhythm. And so I would say that really was a big impact to start. I find dancing a good stress relief, and it's also a great way to like socialize with people. So not necessarily in work, but like outside of work, just having like a good social life. What was the second half of your question?
How did your friends influence you to take the skills to the digital market?
Friends just in life?
Yeah, well, you mentioned that your friends kind of influenced you in a way to start with TikTok and...
I think largely just like encouragement. When you have good people around you and they're like, oh, I see this for you. Like, I can see you doing this. Those votes of confidence help you and they give you confidence to like try things. So having a good network like that is how it helps, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome back to the Washington Journalism and Media Conference held at George Mason University. I can't believe it's already day 5. I remember waking up this morning, getting into professional clothing to head to breakfast, which I don't remember, to board the bus to head to the National Mall. From there, we stopped at the Ulysses S. Grant Memorial to take professional photos. And from there, I went to the Russell Building to meet with Michigan Senator Alyssa Slotkin's speechwriter, Alexis Sargent, and we talked about the craft and how she writes her speeches, and my work as a journalist, some laws or things I want the federal government to work on, which I'll explain in a little bit, because after that I went to the National Gallery of Art with a few people. After meeting up with them and explored, it was awesome. Before I went back in that direction to the Hart Building to meet with Michigan Senator Gary Peters, his Chief of Staff, Caitlin Stevenson, Ben Finfrock, and Michael Dexter, who are press schedulers. And Michael also handles the digital stuff when it comes to social media. And from there, I was talking a lot about adding more security for religious institutions coming from recent attacks like the March 12th car driven into Temple Israel in West Bloomfield, Michigan, or when there was something that happened at a mosque a couple months ago. It shouldn't have to come out of the pocket of that institution to have to cover their security. People should feel safe going. I was also talking about the Student Voices Act and the cases that got to where we're at now, where student journalists aren't protected. I wanted to talk about that and see if there was anything that could be done on a national level. And I recently wrote an article on Max Columbus Productions.weebly.com about America 250, and I wrote the Trumpification of America. You know, why are we trying to beautify America, change laws to better suit one person when it's already so beautiful, the fact that we're here? So that was something I really wanted to talk about, and started with going into the abuse of power. Now, I didn't formally structure these conversations. I thought about them. I thought, I'm not going to formally write it out, because as a journalist, I just want a normal conversation. I can talk about my work, podcasting, how I got to where I am, and tie in these issues within the articles that I've written, specifically the Why Never Again Means Now and how it connects to Passover story. That's where I fit in the funding for religious institutions. And so that was really fun. And then we left the National Mall after that meeting, and went back to George Mason University, where we had about 2 hours to gala ready. And from there, we went to a Marriott for our gala, and we ate dinner, had fun dancing. I'm in a different suit for that than I was earlier today. And then we were listening to sad songs on the way home. We've made some amazing friendships. We've all met some incredible people here. And we just don't want it to end, specifically the friendships. I look back at friendships in the past when I've been in a group. We've never been on a bus jamming out to sad songs. We were all singing. It was a community. You know, you often watch the movies and see that, like at a summer camp movie. So to be able to do that, that just hits in a different way than you expect it. Well, we've got one more day with closing ceremonies, breakfast, and the airport, and we'll see you soon. Welcome back to the Washington Journalism and Media Conference hosted at George Mason University, Day 6 vlog. If you notice the background behind me is different than in prior vlogs, it's because I'm at home filming post-conference. I was having a sore voice from the amount of fun we had at the gala and that morning that I wanted to document this correctly and in my full energy. I'm not vlogging for all of you, it's just wonderful that I have this platform on YouTube, but to remember the moments and what I've learned. I was filming a recap each night rather than vlogging throughout the day so that I could be present. I wouldn't have had the same interactions with people if I was doing that. The people I've met and talked to and the relationships, none of that would have happened if I didn't go, and it was very important that I did. I've learned a lot, and I'm excited to bring back a lot of things too, but also to continue to fight for the protection of voices, specifically within press and student press, which I'll be talking to lawmakers about soon. But I remember waking up that morning and getting ready for heading to Southside for a final breakfast at the conference, where everyone was just having a hard time believing that it was the final day of the conference, that a week has already gone by. We were so busy and having so much fun that it didn't feel like a week. And then we met in our color groups to get these quirky, cute animal headbands that we all put on for a photo. We got to talk about the color group and how we all came in one way and left another. That can be friendship-wise, experience-wise, what we've learned. You know, a lot of us didn't come in with a journalism background, but how we all grew and connected with one another. It was something really special. After that, we went to hear Sam Wolf, a senior account executive at LinkedIn, who talked about always wanting to be a on-air personality from a young age, but when he got into high school, he was given two different schedules. One the school had, one he had. They didn't match, and truancy wasn't a thing in his vocabulary. He was attending the wrong class according to the school's records, so eventually he was found and had his first journalism class, where he was really inspired. And shortly after that, he went to the Washington Journalism and Media Conference as a correspondent. Now he talks about being a senior account executive at LinkedIn, where he helps young businesses and small businesses grow. And then we were all just talking about our experience at the conference before disembarking to go home. And during that time, no one really was saying goodbye. It was see you later. Let's have another color group meeting in 5 to 10 years. Let's stay in touch. And that's something that you don't get everywhere. We were all talking for the first time at the conference. We knew who was in our color group about 2 weeks before. I didn't know who my roommates were that till I got on campus that day. So the people I've met to the people I've worked with, it's been an incredible honor to get to work with all of you and learn from you, to interact with. I'm so grateful. And if I hadn't gone to this conference, I wouldn't have these relationships. I look back at the conference about, I've heard from so many different speakers about so many different topics. It's been an amazing experience, but it also wouldn't have been the same if it weren't for the people I'd met along the way, the people within my color group, the people I've met outside of my color group. Wouldn't have been the same. To the staff that worked tirelessly to create this program, your energy, patience, leadership, and guidance didn't go unnoticed. Even if I didn't know you or get to meet you, I appreciate the work you've done. Without you, this program would not be possible. To my family who reminded me about my beliefs and that this was a learning opportunity, I don't know what I was thinking. I appreciate your guidance in reminding me about this and reminding me where I need to go and what I need to do. And that you were able to help provide this amazing experience for me. However, it's also not a coincidence that on the final day of the conference, I heard that my application to the University of Kansas to study journalism and Jewish studies was accepted. So I don't know what the future is going to bring. And as the director, Elena Johnson, read us the book Maybe, who knows where we'll be, what we will be doing. Maybe I'll be doing journalism. Maybe I'll be doing something else. But that's for the future to tell. Maybes are okay. And so I hope you will continue to follow me through this journey, this bright journey that is just getting started. For watching my vlog series on the conference, and I look forward to taking this info back with me and being able to use it to become a better journalist. But for now, I'm Max Columbus, and we'll see you soon.